Module 4, Franciscan Peacemaking. In medieval Europe, Franciscans had a reputation as peacemakers. Coming from many different backgrounds, living together mostly in harmony, and having renounced their claims to property, family, and city, they were considered neutral arbitrators. Furthermore, living a life steeped in the gospel and drawing from a deep and abiding relationship with God through prayer and devotional practice gave friars the wisdom, patience, and courage to deal with warring factions. Within the life of Francis himself, there are a number of accounts that illustrate his role as someone who sought to build bridges to seek greater understanding in order to bring peace. Peace and peacemaking were part of Francis' identity. Peace and all good, or in Latin, pax et bonum, or pace bene, was a common greeting used by Francis and the early brothers. May the Lord give you peace is another one. One verse of the Canticle of the Creatures, which we've already covered, describes Francis mediating peace between the Podesta and the Bishop of Assisi in the weeks before he died. The story of Francis and Malik el-Kamil is one of the most well-known stories of Franciscan peacemaking and bridge building. It is covered in a number of the resources that I've included in this module, so I won't revisit it here. Underlying Francis' peacemaking was his willingness to cross boundaries, to risk social disapproval and take physical risks, to meet people where they were and to see beyond social stigma and outward appearance. One example of this is the story of Francis and the leper. As the story goes, one day the young Francis was riding his horse. Now this was early in his journey, while he was still living as a young man in Assisi, enjoying fine wine, fine food, good friends, and parties. However, the gospel had started to work on him, and Francis was starting to question his assumptions and his journey in life. And so Francis was riding his horse, and he saw ahead of him a figure in rags, looking dishevelled, and carrying a wooden clapper. This was a leper. Now, lepers in that period, people with disfiguring skin disease who were social outcast. They may or may not have had the disease we call leprosy, or Hansen's disease. Medical science was not too precise at that point. However, to be a leper was to have been cast out of society, to have had a funeral rite said as you left your village and your house, to be excluded from work, from living in towns and villages, to have to wear or carry a wooden clapper, or in some communities it was a bell, to warn ordinary citizens of your presence. Lepers were disfigured by their disease, often with smelly wounds. They were the poorest of the poor. So as Francis approached, first he considered an excuse to turn around. Actually, he didn't need an excuse. If he were to turn aside, no one would have judged him. But moved by something else, he continued towards the figure. And as he approached the figure, He considered giving him alms, reaching into his pouch, getting some coins and throwing it to the figure, to avoid getting too close because of the smell, and no one would have judged him. However, Francis rode closer, and as he rode up to the man, he considered reaching over from his horse and dropping some coins into the waiting hands to avoid the risk of contact and contagion, and no one would have judged him there either. However, Francis, moved by shame and remorse at his feelings of disgust and revulsion at this fellow child of God, he got off his horse and approached the man. Taking some coin, he reached out to embrace the man who had been cast out and without human contact for so long. He recognized this person as another human being, as a person made in the image of Christ, worthy of love and respect. Embracing him, he gave him some coins, his alms, then mounted his horse and rode away. This episode stayed with Francis for the rest of his life, and in fact, it was a pivotal turning point in his life. And it was soon after that, according to the testament that Francis wrote at the end of his life, that Francis turned from his life of pleasure in the city to living on the streets, and the life that eventually became what we know him for today. At the heart of peacemaking is encounter, moving from the comfortable, crossing the boundaries into the uncomfortable and the unfamiliar, and seeing seeing the person as God sees them. So in this module, we'll hear from Marie Dennis from Pax Christi, or at least the time of the recording, talk about Francis and peacemaking. We'll then, I have a blog post from Donald Rees, a third order English Franciscan, who provides some other examples of Franciscan peacemaking from the tradition, including some 20th century examples. And then we will look at Pope Francis' recent encyclical, Fratelli Tutti. Firstly, we will, through the analysis of Daniel Horan, who in his article from the National Catholic Reporter looks at the Franciscan aspects of this text. And then we will look at excerpts of the text itself. Fratelli Tutti is a long document, it's 8 chapters. In fact, it could be a whole study series in itself. So we're not going to be looking at the whole document, although you're welcome to. Rather, if you can look at the introduction, that is paragraphs 1 to 8, and then a section from chapter 6, paragraphs 215 to 224. And so you will see this is an illustration. What we see in Fratelli Tutti, and particularly those sections we read, is an illustration of how Christians and all people of good faith can take up peacemaking in our daily lives as a spiritual practice. Peacemaking is a Franciscan spiritual practice relevant for the 21st century, as it has been ever since the time of the first Franciscans. As you review these resources, consider the following questions. Firstly, is there anything in these stories that surprised you? If so, what was it, and why? Secondly, what are the risks and barriers to peacemaking? Thirdly, consider conflicts in your life, at home, at work, in your community, or within your extended family. how could you work as a peacemaker? And finally, as you feel comfortable, share and discuss your answers with the group. May the Lord give you peace.